Hi students, I would like to put together these, what I'm going to call micro lecture lessons that will be, I'm going to try to, my goal is to keep them about 10 minutes, but to really focus in on an aspect of the chapter that I think is the most complicated to understand or requires the most explanation possibly, or in the past semesters I noticed that students have had the hardest time with. So I hope these are helpful for you. So for chapter 1, you of course are going through and really getting a feel for what is developmental psychology, the study of developmental psychology. I think for most of you, this will feel like a review. It should be theories and ideas and the scientific method and things that you did study in general psychology. But depending upon when you took general psychology, we might be a little rusty. So I think on this chapter, what I'd like to do is do an overview of the different theories that we use in lifespan growth and development or human development. And just, you know, freshen up our memories on these different paradigms, different schools of thought, if you will. So the first one, and he's a hard character to forget, is Sigmund Freud. Freud's work was mostly noted between the years of 1856 and 1939. Of course, Sigmund Freud brought us the psychoanalytic theory. And if you will remember, the psychoanalytic theory is based upon unconscious motives. Freud really believed that our unconscious mind is what drove human behavior. And it was really influenced by our childhoods, what we experienced when we were younger, and then it really is the undertone of all of our behavior. So Freud is known as the first psychoanalyst. He gave us the 5 psychosexual stages, and each stage required us to meet a certain level of satisfaction to move on. Of course, we can become fixated in that stage. So after Freud, theory and psychoanalysis came about, we had another theorist come along by the name of Erik Erikson. So Erikson will be discussed quite a bit in this book because Erikson gave us 8 developmental stages. And so his stages, known as the psychosocial stages, really will be studied in this book throughout the lifespan. And we will talk about what's happening in each stage and look at it through the lens of Erik Erikson's theory. So it starts from childhood. The unique thing about Erikson's is that it starts at childhood, but it goes all the way through the entire lifespan. So much more to come on Erik Erikson. Our next area that we'll look at, so that was the psychoanalysis, psychoanalytics. Now we're looking at behaviorism. And for human development class, what we really look at with behaviorism is the learning theory and conditioning. And so our learning theory, we will look at and focus on the observable behavior. So as we talk about early childhood and what kids are experiencing and learning, and when rules are set and so forth, that's all observable behaviors. So you'll study many different classic studies done in developmental psychology that's focused on learning theory. And so if you'll remember, when we talk about learning, we talk about something called conditioning. And conditioning is the process in which we're trying to get at the response that we want. So whether we're using something like operant conditioning, which is a reward system, or a, punishment, which we will look at also. But conditioning is really working to get the behavior that we are looking for, the desired outcome. One big name in behaviorism is John Watson. He was an American psychologist. He was one of the earliest behaviorists to really focus on the learning theory. If you'll remember, John Watson is the one that brought us baby Albert. If you remember that classic study done and really looked at this idea of classical conditioning, which is I just mentioned operant conditioning. Of course, we have classical conditioning, which is where we pair an unconditioned stimulus with a conditioned stimulus to get the conditioned response. So again, that should be a little bit of an overview from your general psychology course, but we will continue looking at the work of behaviorists and that of John Watson. Our next human development theorist in the paradigm of behaviorism, of course, is Ivan Pavlov. And I was just alluding to Pavlov's study on classical conditioning. If you'll remember Pavlov from General Psych, you should have learned about his study with the salivating dogs and really kind of discovering, he was a Russian physiologist. He was studying the digestive process of dogs and collecting and measuring their saliva to understand how saliva starts breaking down food. When he noticed that the dogs started salivating even before they started eating, when they knew the trainer or the lab assistant was going to get the food. And so that's that learning with a conditioned stimulus and an unconditioned stimulus to get the desired response. So we'll continue looking at classical conditioning in this course. Of course, I jumped ahead a little bit while ago. I mentioned operant conditioning. Operant conditioning comes from B.F. Skinner. And if you'll see, as late as the 1990s, Skinner was still alive and I'm sorry, the early 1990s. Skinner was still alive and was highly influenced by Pavlov's studies of dogs. And so Skinner also used animals. He specifically used rats, pigeons, and he even used his own daughter in his experiments. But he was trying to get the desired response through a reward system, which is really what our operant conditioning is. So if you've ever seen the rat mazes where the idea is that the rat can solve the maze and get to the treat at the end. That is from the work of B.F. Skinner. And then we look at the social learning theory. And the name associated with the social learning theory is Albert Bandura. And Bandura was a social learning theorist who really influenced that the behavior and influence of other people influences our own behavior. So from General Psych, you might remember the study of the what he called the Bobo dolls. They're those blow up, and they're weighted at the bottom and you can hit them and they bounce right back up. They put kids in a room with these Bobo dolls that had never seen them before, and the kids kind of just looked at them like, what are these? And didn't do anything with them. They took that same group of kids and put them in a room where they watched video of other kids in the room with those same dolls, hitting, kicking, throwing them over, put the kids right back in the room. And what do you think they did the second time they saw the dolls? That's right. They started hitting and kicking them just like they had observed on the video. So, throughout this course, we will be looking at how social learning theory, what their take is on lifespan growth and development, how each stage we are influenced by the people that we're around, our peers and our individuals. We'll spend a lot of time on social learning theory, specifically in the stage of adolescence. And then we have our cognitive theory, and this is the work of Jean Piaget. You will hear the name Piaget so much in this class because he was our cognitive developmentalist. So you'll notice as we go through this book, and one chapter we're really looking at the body and the mind. We'll look at physical development, and then we'll really get into the psychological piece of it. So anytime we're studying cognitive development for each stage of the lifespan, we will really focus in on Piaget's work. You will actually, as part of your lifespan project, when we get into childhood, you will actually replicate a Piaget study. So Piaget gave us things like object permanence and fluid thought. And so we will really build on that, and you'll have an opportunity to do your own Piaget study. And he did have age-related periods of cognitive development. They were known as sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. So much more to come on Piaget. And lastly, we'll talk about today in this micro lecture, evolutionary theory. And so this, there are other evolutionary theorists, but probably the most notable name is Charles Darwin. And Charles Darwin spent a lot of his work really just observing different types of animals in nature, and really came away with two things: is that nature works to ensure that species survive and reproduce. Now, you may have heard the term survival of the fittest. That term was based upon the work of Charles Darwin, but he didn't actually coin the term. Actually, one of his followers that really read his work, Sturman, is actually the one that coined that term. But that's the idea, is that nature does ensure that the strongest genetic pool survives, and that they're the ones that reproduce. And when we talk about evolutionary theory, that's really what we're getting at. We're talking about how organisms change to better meet the changing environment. And so when we talk about things like epigenetics, for instance, where we can actually see genetic changes happening at the level of DNA in response to what's going on in the environment. So again, we're kind of high level here. This hopefully is mostly a review from general psych, but also sets the stage and helps you understand how these theories we will use them. We will study them in each stage of the lifespan that we go through. So hope you're enjoying chapter 1, and I'll have more micro lectures soon.